Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to this very insightful LinkedIn Live. This discussion is brought to you by Optiv, the Cyber Advisory and Solutions Leader. I am very excited to be here with you all today. Thank you for joining. My name is Jessica Hetrick. I'm the Cyber Resilience Leader at Optiv, and I am thrilled to have us joined by Mr. Brian Rozak and Sean Tufts here. In just a moment, we'll let them introduce themselves. We're excited for the conversation today. But before we get started, I wanted to take a moment and acknowledge that today is International Women's Day. As a woman myself, I am thrilled about hosting this panel today. From SOC leaders to CISOs, from cyber resiliency leaders to CEOs, women play a critical role in cybersecurity today. And it's predicted that women will represent about 30% of the global cybersecurity workforce by 2025. And more than that, 35% by 2031. And with 3 million jobs open worldwide, it's a tremendous opportunity for women to not only see themselves in cyber, but become passionate about the work that they do in this space and make their mark on the industry. One of the many areas where women in cyber are going to have a major impact is going to be in the space that we're talking about today. They're going to be able to make a difference in the OT, in the IoT, in the IIoT spaces. And that's a great segue into today's conversation. Today, we are going to be talking about the topic of overcoming OT security challenges. And I am graced by Brian Rozak and Sean Tufts. I'll let them introduce themselves here. But we're going to be going over a lot today, guys. I'm really excited about it. So Sean, I'll let you introduce yourself. Thank you for joining us.
I'm also going to out you as being named one of the top women in cybersecurity today, right?
Thank you. Yes, officially as of today. I appreciate
We
that.
had two, actually. We had Julie Talbot Hubbard as well, right?
Yes, sir.
Fantastic. Sean Tufts, I'm the director of our OT practice here at Optiv. OT for us includes kind of everything headless, things that don't run in normal Linux or Microsoft Windows environments, and things that are embedded really deep into power plants, into refineries, into transportation centers. We get to handle all those cybersecurity needs kind of soup to nuts, which is really exciting. It's been an interesting growth curve in the last 5 or 6 years, and we've been at the front seat of that, helping clients through tough problems. So it's been a fun ride. Brian?
Thanks. I don't know who color coordinated our shirts today, but this worked out really great. We're all sporting the Optiv blue today. Thanks first for inviting me to participate. I'm really happy to be here. I'm new to the whole Forrester analyst position. I just joined last summer. I still have a long CISO career, 20 years, 13 at Texas Instruments, and then 7 at Optiv. So it's good to be back again. Still teaching at the University of Dallas, just hit my 10-year anniversary there. And OT security is one of the primary research areas for me. We recognize that this is also a growing area of concern, not only for the nation, but a number of our customers. And so we're trying to establish more research in this area. And in addition to OT security, I also am picking up some physical security research, because that's still very relevant in a lot of these industries, particularly around access control and things like event management and evacuations. So look forward to the discussion. Let's kick it off.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Sean. Really excited that you guys are here today. Obviously, this is a crazy relevant topic. But before we get into any specifics, just for the audience that's here, obviously, most folks are going to know OT being operational technology, but can you share a little bit about the differences between the 3 big acronyms that we hear all the time, IoT, OT, IIoT, and explain, why it's so relevant for us to be talking about? Sean, I'll throw this question to you to get kicked off, and then Brian to add any additional.
It's funny. We actually have this. We went into a client environment last week at a utility, and we ended up putting a button on the table that was the acronym button. And if someone didn't know an acronym, they were free to ring the button. We have to wear a couple hats on the OT side. So operational technology is all the digital equipment that runs heavy infrastructure, runs physical processes, runs elevators, runs temperature control systems. Loosely, those are OT. There are also some of those are IoT devices, so Internet of Things pieces and parts. We have to wear 2 hats. The first hat we have to wear is our traditional IT hat, our acronyms around NAC and around SOC and around all these kind of cool, fun acronyms we get to play with. But then we have a whole engineering side of the world that's using terms like SCADA, using terms like MES systems, SIS systems. So we end up having to reset acronyms a lot. And most of our first couple mean by that. A lot of times we're just defining what the environment looks like. Is this IoT, OT, whatever acronym of choice? Is it something that's embedded and is powering a physical process, or is it something that's running on the corporate network that is a Peloton bike or an Alexa? Sure, those are red herrings, but there are some things inside those same kind of devices that are important to critical infrastructure. Brian, does that match with what you see?
Yeah, it does. In fact, I have a colleague here at Forrester who focuses on IoT, and then I focus on OT. And what we find is the classic Venn diagram is there's that meshy piece in the middle where we sort of intersect. We try to look at it from the standpoint of, is it industrial or commercial, like in your home or something like that? The other area we tend to divide it out is it actually driving a piece of equipment or some type of automation, or is it just a passive collector of statistics that's then funneling it back to a local system? So, but often I'll get on a call and go, "Oh, you really wanted to talk to Patty," and vice versa. So we share a lot of calls these days.
I'm sure. So Brian, I'll keep it with you just for a moment here.
Sure.
Coming from the Forrester point of view, I'm sure that you work with a lot of organizations. You see a lot of the maturity spectrum. Can you share a little bit about why OT security is so important in today's day and age, and at what stage of maturity do you see most organizations when you're going out and having various conversations, as you and Patty very least split the phone off often, and then Sean, I'll pass it back to you to counter.
Yeah. Well, from an important standpoint, it drives the physical world. You just don't look any further than, go back to, what was it, 2021, the Colonial Pipeline, incident. I know we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of that, but I remember my mom actually texted me about that event, and she's all worried about, do I need to go get gas? What's happening? She actually thought I was working the incident too, because
Of
anytime a
course.
cyber event hits the news, she figures I'm involved somehow. But
Absolutely.
she's a complete time zone away from the pipeline, but yet it grabbed her attention and she was worried about it. So it just shows how this is a public issue. Every industry is affected in some way. And so it's really important that we focus on the security aspects of it. And from a maturity standpoint, it's the full spectrum, right? There are a number of industries that are just now starting to understand the need to develop a cybersecurity strategy. If you look at industries that historically have had more regulations, like the utilities, they're a little bit further along. When the TSA came out with some of their recommendations last year, surprise, I got a surge in calls from pipeline companies wanting to talk cybersecurity. And so you see that dynamic. The good news is people are having the conversation. We do a security survey every year, and we found that OT security is one of the top 5 priorities of our clients in terms of focusing on building a security strategy. And then we also asked about, okay, it's great, it's a top priority, but are you actually investing in it? And almost 2/3 of the respondents said yes, they're planning to invest more in OT security in this upcoming year. So that's great news to see that people are recognizing the need and they're starting to take steps. But they're behind. They're definitely behind what we have in the corporate IT security world.
Oh, I really
Thanks,
want to
Brian.
start
Anything to add, Sean?
I really want to start a Reddit feed for things moms tell security professionals. That same day my mom was pinging me, "Hey, are you okay?" Yeah, Mom, I live in Colorado. We're okay. Should I buy fuel? That's funny. Yeah, actually, and Brian, I'll go one step back. Colonial was a big inflection point for a lot of us. No one knew, I remember briefing my executives on what Colonial is and who they are and, what the peer set looks like in that midstream pipeline space and how they operate. Because that wasn't a known name. Either are their peers, even today. For me, another big inflection point was COVID. So I worked at General Electric. I've worked in rotating machinery my whole life. I got into cyber when I answered a cold email while at GE that says, "Hey, who knows our clients and wants to learn cyber?" And I was like, that sounds like fun. the interesting thing was we were heavy on oil and gas, heavy on utilities, but COVID changed it. That April when the world shut down, my first 4 phone calls that next week were from toilet paper companies. The shelves were bare and people were panicked, and manufacturers didn't know how to keep up with that slack. Shipping groups didn't. And we've seen successive, I guess, wave is maybe a very specific term for Forrester, but we've seen waves of industry come to the fold. And whether it was something following a colonial or manufacturing blip or whatever, we saw for a while, obviously it was sure toilet paper, but then it was pharma, then it was logistics, then it was raw chicken and poultry, then it was, JBS hit, and then it was pork and pork products, and then canned food products. It's been an interesting wave to see that go. I don't know if they're all getting together at a conference or, one Wall Street Journal article will change everything, but we've seen that same attention shift.
Yeah. Yep. And the other thing, Jessica, I wanted to mention was the stakes are radically different when you talk OT security versus IT security. It's nobody gets hurt if the salesperson's laptop, gets locked out or their password expires. But I can remember in working through threat modeling and other security issues in the factories, if something bad happened, people could die. I mean, there are dangerous chemicals, there are, moving equipment. And so, you can't afford to be wrong in these environments. And I think that's why this is becoming so important as we start doing more connectivity between an OT environment that used to be completely isolated from the internet, but now you're seeing it getting connected to business automation systems. I want to manage my inventory, to even connecting out to the internet to work with third-party suppliers. So things are changing, the environment's changing, threat actors are targeting these environments, and they've got to find a way to protect against these cyber attacks.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that we're only like 5 minutes in, we're already talking about safety. And that's
right.
The exact point. We need to be knitting together cyber and safety together. OSHA, a different environment. We don't talk about OSHA in cybersecurity channels all that often, but they're a big force. They can shut down a plant faster than anyone in the world. I would say operators, and I come from the oil and gas industry, so groups are more afraid of OSHA than they are PCI compliance. I mean, that's a non-real-time impact thing. Sure, it's a big issue, but yeah, it's just a different focus.
And you can use that to your advantage because the mindset around safety and protecting the environment and availability is deeply ingrained in the OT personnel. And if you can connect the dots from how, regardless of whether it's a faulty valve or a piece of equipment that may have malfunctioned, a cyber attack could have the same outcome. And so that really resonates with a number of clients that I've worked with to say, you're right, that's great. Now let's just plug cyber strategy into our existing framework and let's try to make it happen.
I love this. Absolutely. We've got a LinkedIn user that just gave an example. Auto manufacturing floor. Someone was seriously injured by a robotic arm. That's real. And that can happen if you run a wrong Nessa scan on the wrong equipment, right?
Yeah, when you start to talk about catastrophe as a measurement of the scale in which cyber can actually impact, it becomes so much more influential because it's no longer just a low, medium, high impact. You're talking about catastrophic incident level events, right? That scale is shifted dramatically when you incorporate IT, and I think the physical and the safety components moving together is hugely important. It's more prevalent now than it ever has been. And it's more of a realistic thing now than it ever has been. And with people needing to access things more quickly. Yeah, there's convenience to it. Having things available, having things remotely connect is crucial. It makes the world go round in today's day and age. However, there's also, of course, the risk that opens up. So as people start to think about where they should start in this journey, Sean, I'm going to keep it with you here, just as we're kind of rolling into this safety conversation. As organizations start to think about what they should be doing in the OT space, or even start to build, what and how should they be going about that, and what recommendations do you kind of throw out there right at the start?
Yeah, great question, and it's a difficult journey, right? So our kind of standard risk assessment framework, the things we look at, the number of findings that we can pull from our database is in the 2000s of things companies need to fix. And in a lot of cases, we use all 2000 in a risk assessment. That's not really helpful though, right? Where do you start that process? A lot of these legacy systems are so, I'll say, barbaric. We're using old equipment. It's been running for years. We're going to not turn it off and just hope it continues. And that leads to a lot of cyber vulnerabilities, anomalies, things that can be taken advantage of. So all my peers think that the OT team is in the future. No, we're actually 10 years in the past. We're still talking about signature-based antivirus. We're still talking about some of those basic fundamentals. So the fastest way to lower your attack surface is still segmentation. We still find companies that are flat. Too many are still flat. We still find companies that have too many facilities sharing informations at the lower level of Purdue, or even segmenting individual processes inside of a refinery, a logistics center. There's no reason the bay doors at a logistics center need to talk to the conveyor belt, needs to talk to the robotic automation system that's picking up a package. Those should and could be all segmented, and that would reduce our surface in a big way. Brian, do you see that too?
I do, and the big surprise in many of these organizations is back to our conversation right at the very beginning of IoT. So they understand the big OT systems, but then they don't realize that, oh yeah, facilities connected up the the elevator and building HVAC system to the network, and now there's an avenue to directly impact these OT equipment, which is why I see a lot of companies starting with asset discovery. What do I have on my network? What's connecting to the internet? That seems to be a very popular initiative right from the start.
So there is a question in the chat that I want to make sure that we hit on here. How about banking ATMs? I know we even kind of at the beginning talked a little bit about like the medical device space. But what about banking ATMs? Do you guys consider those OT, IoT? How do we take into account that risk there? Because financial risk, I think most people would agree that the finance space is so crucial, and there's so many regulatory requirements and honestly standards and procedures that they need to be focused on in order to maintain their businesses. Plus, everybody's always worried about their pocketbooks. Talk to me a little bit about the banking space.
It's a good question. I wouldn't say, and because of how regulated ATMs have been historically, that we don't see them a lot in my conversations. I think the thing we're going to start seeing specifically on the retail banking side is anywhere there's a human and anywhere there's a client and anywhere there's a digital system, we're attacking physical security differently than we ever have. And Brian, that's a place you're pretty familiar with, right?
Yeah. The other area that, Jessica, we tend to see is around the medical profession, right? The healthcare industry, with all of those connected devices in very high traffic areas, right? Doctors' offices, hospitals, emergency rooms, and then with the strict, regulations, it can be very difficult to introduce security technology into those environments.
Awesome.
Yeah, my wife has a rule for me. She says, Sean, don't look at the USB ports when we go into this doctor's office. You're going to be upset. You're going to want to tinker with it. Hands in your pockets. We're here for my kid.
Yeah, I tore an abdominal muscle a couple years ago training for a marathon. And so I had to have surgery, and they were going to do the surgery with a robot. And the physician came into the room, and he's like, do you have any questions about the procedure? And I was like, yeah, when's the last time you patched the software of that robot? And he looked at me and he goes, I've been practicing medicine. He's like, I've been practicing medicine for 20 years, and you're the first person to ever ask me that question.
It's really fair. I actually had a robot. Yeah, I had a robot fix my hip actually recently, about 4 months ago. I had hip surgery, and same thing. The doctor was like, no, I control the robot. I'm like, but do you control the robot? And he's like, don't do cyber things on me. That's what his response was. I'm like, all right, just fix it. We'll just go with that. Brian, I'm going to keep it with you. As we kind of roll into this next question, I'm going to combine one of the questions in the chat as well as one of the ones that we have kind of ready to go here. What are some of the most common challenges you see as we advance OT security programs? And what are your recommendations for addressing the challenges? Plus, Zero trust? Is that a recommendation? Let's talk through that scenario, and then Sean, we'll throw it back to you, sir.
Sure. So the first recommendation is collaboration. Build a partnership. One of the challenges I had initially when I was tasked with developing a cybersecurity strategy around manufacturing, I didn't know who the players were. I mean, I was used to dealing with IT administrators, network administrators. Now I've got to talk to plant managers, chemical engineers. So just building that relationship and having a collective approach. In the research that I've done in these first 6 months, the real successful companies have that strong collaborative partnership between IT, OT, facilities. They're another key player. Physical security is often another player in that trifecta. And so if you've got a conversation going, you're going to have a much greater chance of finding a solution that works. Because again, I came from it from a totally different perspective than what the OT personnel were coming from. And so finding that common ground was critical to do that. Zero trust, I've got to be honest, it's just not a conversation that comes up very often in the OT environment. Sean, you mentioned the Purdue model. That is still the overwhelming framework and model that I hear when talking with customers. I think zero trust is a good option for OT environments. I see the Purdue model as just a natural extension of that, where you could put a policy enforcement point at the different Purdue layers. But I think one of the big challenges is identity. Identity's tough in these environments with shared accounts, group accounts, automation accounts. I mean, I can remember engineers bragging about how, oh yeah, we haven't rebooted this system in 3 years. I'm thinking, man, that scares the life out of me. So, John, I don't know what you guys are seeing in some of your engagements, but identity seems to be the tough one for me.
Yeah, zero trust is a big topic in general, right? And it has a home in different places, right? Identity is one you mentioned. So is network resiliency. So is protectionary tools. All those phases, and I think we're just getting into the start of that. Everyone's been focused really heavily on the network. I mean, from the start, I was talking about segmentation, right? But I've seen a real growth actually in things I never thought. We're talking, actually, we were on with an oil company yesterday talking about SailPoint and identity governance and how are we issuing credentials? How should corporate do it on the cloud SaaS app side? Sure, this isn't a SailPoint commercial, but and then how should we be doing that on-prem? How do we make sure that what we give our people are right? And how do we audit it? We found in an assessment recently, AD credentials live being used that were older than Active Directory. Active Directory is a product that was invented, released in 93, something like that. And we found AD credentials from 82, or no, 89. I don't know how that was even possible, but they were still live and active. So we need more opportunities. And we've been doing some PAM projects in OT, IGA, MFA's always been a topic, but the more we blend identity into this network conversation, the more it feels like zero trust. And I think as we start to build these building blocks up, we'll find that path for zero trust in OT. I don't know if we'll call it that though.
Fair. Let's go back to some of those challenges again, because I really want to hone in, and I know some folks are throwing some interesting things in the chat right now. Brian, you hit on the collaboration piece, and I want to focus in there. What is the most important value that you see in CISOs building a relationship with OT leaders to help spread that conversation? Talk to me a little bit more about that. Where are those conversations starting? How do they develop over time? And where do you see as like a best practice or something that's really good?
Sure. So I've had a lot of success with cross-functional committees where, I'm bringing sort of that cyber foundation, to the conversation. But like I said, they're bringing in the safety, conversation as well, and the availability. Typically I worried about confidentiality. I don't want my intellectual property stolen. I don't want, somebody's credit card to get stolen. They're worried about how do I keep this up and running? And so when you've got those two different perspectives, you've got to collaborate to see each other's point of view and try to find that common ground. So, I'm used to, in the corporate world, just running scans almost continuously on systems. in OT, I had to wait to a maintenance window. And even during the maintenance window, I didn't get the whole maintenance window. I only got a small slice of that maintenance window. And then even if I found something, I may not be able to patch it, right? The OEMs may not have released an updated firmware for that. And so that's where you have to start getting creative around, all right, what kind of compensating controls can I put in place? Is it further upstream? Do I need to do more network segmentation? So you have to be a little bit more creative and look at other options than what you're traditionally used to doing in the corporate setting.
And Brian, you hit the culture piece on the head there. And I think that's worth spending a lot more time on, because I think, I mentioned Nessa scanning earlier. I mentioned firewalling. All these things are projects that IT has come to the table and said, you will do this and do it now. And success or failure, has reigned. Both, we've had lots of successes and lots of failures. For us, when we get into a position where we can sit, and this is from a consultancy side, right? But when we get to sit a security-minded CISO in a room with a person that every day in their life wears a hard hat, and we say, hey, what are the commonalities here? There's a lot. Cybersecurity and uptime is number 1 and 2 for both of them, but it's staggered. Sure, the CISO wants cybersecurity, and so does the operator. That's a critical element for them. They want this equipment to be up, available, and safe. They want that. So if we can start to blend our recommendations away from, this is the NIST CSF standard, you will do this. No, let's take a pulse. Let's see how we can get to that end goal that NIST is trying to portray, having a resilient operating system, and find something that works for both parties. Yeah. We had an opportunity where we found back to identity. There was an on-site AD server. It was sitting underneath a vat of molten food product. They got chocolate up to some temperature. I don't know what it was, but it was like 200 gallons of liquid chocolate at a high temperature. And the AD server was sitting not segregated, nothing between it. It was sitting below that server, or below that vat. So we got to have a live conversation of, hey, clearly we don't want this. Let's move it. And in exchange for moving it, what do you want? And we got to play back and forth with what the requirements were. Hey, we got to keep it on-prem, but sure, we'll move it. Okay, fine, but you have to install this tool. Fine, we'll do an audit. And we were able to live hash that out so that both parties got what they needed. Security advanced, OT got to maintain their uptime like they want.
Absolutely. Yeah, another area where I saw a lot of good synergy was around incident response. And so, they run, different incident response drills than what I was used to, right? I'm used to containing, the ransomware and locking the system down, locking the account, et cetera. They're used to, how do I shut off the gas so that it doesn't cause an explosion, and how do I evacuate people in a quick and safe manner? And so figuring out, how do I weave those two incident response procedures together? And I learned a lot from the OT team when it came to crisis management. That's where I first heard of the term incident commander. I never heard of that term before, right? And so I was like, man, you've got a great process for, notifying employees, notifying law enforcement, notifying, medical personnel. So it was really neat, because I ended up, lifting 70% of their procedures and just using them in my incident response for cyber events. Sure. So that's another great, and again, it's all about, safety of the employees, safety of the environment, safety of the public. That's another common ground where you can work together if you're having difficulty building that initial collaborative effort.
Yeah, we did that live with a client too. So Jess, what James Turgill, his former title is what?
He was the number 6 at the FBI. He was the FBI's CIO, and before that, he was the head of HR. He ran. He has quite a few titles, but his most recent one before Optiv's VP role was CIO of the FBI.
So we sat him in a room with production people from a food manufacturer, a large one. And we were taking that information and saying, hey, on the operations side, if this machine goes down that makes this cereal, bread product, whatever it was, what would you do? And we were having a guy like James ask that question, watching the CISO in the room react as he was saying, well, I'd go back to this book on the shelf that is the Emerson manual, and I'd start rebooting it. And then the conversation is, how long would that take? Oh, a month to 6 months. This plant might never open again. Sure, hopefully it's 6 weeks, but those kind of things are real. And once we get to expose the upper end of our businesses to what that person would have to go through from a restart perspective, it's not just rebooting the machine, it's rebooting all the machines, and sometimes starting from scratch.
Awesome. I want to go back to one topic that we started to touch on a little bit that seems to be generating a good bit of chat too, is patching. Interested to hear everyone's take on active versus passive scanning, patching from an OT hygiene perspective, and then just let's just talk broadly about the asset discovery conversation, because that one's huge in this space, because if you can't see it, you don't know that it's actually a risk for you, right? So how do you work through all of that? What are those kind of initial steps, your takes on all of those different various perspectives there?
Who gets to jump on that one first, Jess? You get a pick.
Eeny, meeny, Brian, go.
All right. So in my research, the passive scanning dominates this environment, and the challenge with that is the traffic's got to cross a boundary or a span port or someplace where your device is located. So that's going to leave some blind spots depending on your network topology, which means some of it's just good old-fashioned roll up your sleeves and go do a manual inventory and ask questions and review it. I wish there was an easy answer, but there's not always an easy one when it comes to some of these environments. As you get up into the higher levels of the Purdue model, you can get a little more aggressive in terms of active scanning. Some of your HMIs and your data custodians, those are a little bit more resistant to disruption from active scanning. And then also looking at traffic both at the perimeter, but inbound and outbound. So don't just worry about what's coming into your environment, but try to look at what else is going out and then follow the path back to where that's coming. Is what we're seeing right now.
I said this in front of one of the passive OT security vendors the other day, and I think they were okay with it, but it caused a little commotion. Shawshank Redemption, the rock that Andy Dufresne holds. When he smashes it into that pipe, two things happened. Number one, a bunch of stuff came back at him. Number two, he had to crawl through 2 miles of sewer pipe to get to, say, Wataneo or whatever that was. That is the same technology we're talking about here. A lot of clients are not prepared for seeing full visibility in these assets and what that actually looks like. I would say if you had 1,000 CVEs today that you have to manage, you're going to have 10,000 tomorrow once we uncover that. So being really thoughtful about your vulnerability management program, how that ties into your patch management program, and understanding that you're about to get a whole bunch of new data into this environment. And being able to security rank. So let's talk on CVEs versus patching. A 10 is not always a 10. There are a lot of Windows XP machines out there, Windows 98, all sorts of old stuff that we know has a high ranking on them. We had a client that had 85 intelligent devices and 8,000 CVEs of 8 or higher. But they also had an amazing firewall system. This thing was actually air-gapped, so it's okay. So number one, let's find out what the criticality of that asset is. Is it a nuclear generator? Is it a machine inside of a human, right? Let's find out what those things are. Is it a process valve that no one cares about? Let's put asset criticality at the front of that. Let's then figure out what the existing compensating controls are so we can re-rank that 10. Hey, maybe that's a 4. Let's re-rank that system from a CVE perspective. And then moving that over into the patch. Sure, you're going to have to patch this equipment eventually. We work through 3 big buckets of patching. Number one is showing progress. A lot of CISOs don't say what we've patched to date. You need that for your job security. Second, what's upcoming? What is this outage window? Brian talked about an outage window that was measured in seconds, right? That's true. Let's find those outage windows. Let's populate what we're doing so we can advertise it to our people, have it on a good schedule so our operators know when it's coming and they can push back if we need. And then the last one's the oh no, never go bucket. That is the bucket of things we are not going to patch until someone comes down with a lottery ticket and a big bag of money. There are systems that have to operate. Replacing that piece of heavy equipment that's running on a Windows XP machine, that's one big package. You can't replace them all. So let's advertise that. Let's advertise it internally, obviously. Let's put that up to our group and saying, hey, here's the risk. We're not going to take it. We're going to transfer this risk. We're going to move it somewhere else. We're going to put a bigger firewall in, whatever that looks like. Being able to adequately explain what the patch program is and what it isn't It does not replace everything. In the 2015 time window, maybe someone in the chat knows this, almost every major CISO, specifically in oil and gas, came out and said, we're going to patch every device. And then they quickly figured out how wrong that was going to be and how long that would take or how little progress they can make. And that was a career limiting move for a couple because they couldn't get done what they told the board they would do. So being thoughtful and very purposeful on what you're doing for patching is the way, not patching every device out there.
Yeah,
Sounds like that
compensated
ties
controls.
heavily.
Yep.
Yeah.
Compensated
That
controls.
sounds also like it ties back heavily, Brian, to what you were alluding to, which is really that relationship piece, that collaboration piece. How you are communicating is extremely important in this space as much as it is in any other space when you're talking about cybersecurity, right? How you're communicating the value of what you're doing, the metrics of success, and ultimately what your key objectives are. And part of that is the relationship building that you'll do between your OT leaders and your cybersecurity leaders, your IT leaders, and then of course the board. Sounds like that's also a big sticking point, Sean, is what you're hitting on there. We did have another question in the chat about secure access or secure remote access for OT. Can you guys speak on differences there and kind of elaborate on one versus the other?
Yes,
Sean,
we
go
can.
first. I need to remember to do that. Sean, you go first this time.
Well, it's a tricky. Most of my hesitation there was just because it's a hard topic, right? We need to build our architectures correctly and give people the right jump box location inside of Purdue to enter the environment. Whether you do that through tried and true simple IT fixes or you go to an SRA platform. To me, a lot of our conversations around security is, the biggest threat actor we have in most cases is the good-hearted employee. The person that wants to do the right thing. We were just talking about patching, that wants to upgrade that system but doesn't know and accidentally knocks out his whole facility. Biggest threat actor. That person's also wanting to access this equipment from their couch. Let's give them a safe way to do that. We know they're going to be doing that. We know they're going to want data from this location. They're going to want control. They're going to want to check in on their job. And we should be giving them that tool. So for me, this is a third-party risk management piece. For the good-hearted employee, for the vendors that are coming in, let's give them the right path to enter the environment. So I think SRA as a technology set is probably going to be the big mover of the next 18 months, where clients are really looking to give that proper vehicle to these employees, to these third-party contractors.
Okay.
Yeah, implementing like even an internal DMZ, where to get from the corporate environment to the OT environment, you're going through a DMZ layer. And then it's the physical aspect. That's the other thing that I often forgot about is in some cases, you also have to worry about the physical access. So what if that maintenance personnel from the equipment manufacturer is bringing in a USB stick or a external hard drive? So checking that before you allow that into your OT environment. And then back to that physical aspect, in some cases, resorting back to physical controls and physical manipulation of the equipment can be a viable alternative. And sometimes, again, as a diehard corporate security person, we forget that. So yes, automation is driving, the different equipment, but a lot of this equipment has a physical backup, so that if that automation fails, I can physically go turn the valve and shut it off. And again, that's where that collaboration again comes into play, is because I may not think of that, and they will make sure that we leverage all of the options that are available to us, especially during an incident, and not just get stuck looking at it from one perspective.
Absolutely. And you guys can hear me okay again?
We can.
This is literally just roulette of whether or not Jessica's internet's going to work apparently at this moment. Good. Okay, so I do want to jump to some recent stuff that's been going on. Last week, there was a release from the White House that indicated defending critical infrastructure is #1 in terms of priority from an approach perspective in the cyberspace. Talk a little bit more about the details there, maybe what the impact will be to industry broadly, and also how we can maybe use that to our advantage, going back to that conversation between the collaboration between CISOs and OT leaders, how we can maybe drive forward the initiatives that we're focused on here. So I'll open the floor. Brian, to you first.
Yeah, so I think it's I think it's great, again, because of the emphasis on, again, safety and protecting our critical infrastructure. As we've seen historically, regulations are a powerful force when it comes to raising attention and driving investment in security. So I think that's another powerful draw, and I hope it gets to some consistency as well. One of the things that is initially frustrating is you got all these competing agencies all trying to make up their own rules, but if we can get to some consistency across these regulations, I think that will be very helpful. Sean, are you seeing any other challenges around the regulations?
Yeah, and before I touch regulation, there's been some scary things that have happened that, like the attack on the Nord Stream pipeline in the North Sea, right? That wasn't cyber, but it's certainly critical infrastructure for Europe, for everywhere. We had an attack on our water system around the Super Bowl 2 years ago. These things are happening from the critical infrastructure side, and on the whole, the government has focused their regulatory efforts onto utilities historically, and then within 30 days of Colonial Pipeline, they had several requirements, some of which were hard to interpret. And let's double click on each one, right? NERC CIP, great regulation, really wide, a little shallow. So it's moved the needle very, very far for our utility clients. There still could be argued some places to go further. Some things like identity solutions, some things like coverage are not wholly addressed, but it's the best we got, and it's really, really good. The TSA memorandum came out, and I think they had, I forget, 46 things you had to do. The first couple, very easy to implement. Well, maybe not. They had to reset every password. Just overnight. You had to reset the whole password. And then at the end, it was going back to zero trust. It was like, have zero trust. I was like, what does that mean? How do we clarify that more, please? So I think we need more guidance from our partners on the federal side to give us some of that encouragement to go and to secure budget and to make this a part of the operating conditions. CISA has 16 critical infrastructure departments, food, logistics, transportation. All those are places that have zero regulations right now. There's some guidance. There's some, hey, you should probably do this. You should maybe not do that. But for our boards to release budget, to carve out that much, a bag of money to go fix this solution is going to require a heavier hand from the government. So it was really cool to see them say, hey, this is our biggest priority. Here's number one, it's critical infrastructure, because we don't want to have a water system hacked. We don't want to have a pipeline disrupted. We want to make sure this stuff is resilient. And I think for the first time in my SCADA career, which is going on 20 years now, I think there's finally the right dominoes in place to make that happen.
And they need to get started now, because this isn't going to take a week or a month. This is a long, multi-year effort for these places to put the security in place. I mean, some of this place, the equipment's designed to last 20, 30 years. So if you think, oh, we'll just go replace it like you do your laptop every 2-3 years, yeah, that's not happening.
Absolutely.
Brian, how many projects do you think a normal sized enterprise can take on the OT side in a year?
We would typically limit it to 3 or less. And even then, it's a phased rollout, right? By factory or by region. And then you usually let it sit, let it run for a little while, see if everything works okay before you move on to the next one. So it's much more cautious than, again, the corporate world where, if something trips over and reboots, that's all right, just get over it.
One of the other, my dogs are now making, they're making a surprise announcement.
Internal feedback.
Yeah. Good Lord. So I want to focus on, we're making sure everyone's paying attention is really what's happening. I want to focus on the threat actor piece just for a brief moment, because we've started to kind of talk a little bit about that. Sean, you mentioned my favorite word, which is resilience. In that White House release, there seemed to be very proactive action direction from a threat actor perspective, dismantling and disrupting. However, as we're looking at the OT space, can we talk about the threat landscape in the OT space and give people a really good understanding about what that looks like? Because I know we've hit on Colonial Pipeline, which we all know was an impact to an IT system where the engineer chose to shut off the pipeline, which we all would, I think, adamantly agree that was most likely the right choice, even though that might not have been the target of the event. But let's talk a little about the threat landscape briefly. I know we're winding down here, but I think it's an important and relevant topic to hit on.
So I mentioned the first one, and I'll kick it over to Brian, but that internal accidental threat actor, purposeful threat actor, we still aren't very mature in our IT systems here. So we have a lot of those problems where the good-hearted employee knocks something out. That's still our biggest. There's a great Twitter feed for Cyber Squirrel 1. It tracks all the times a squirrel gets in the generator boxes and causes a blackout. That's still a big threat actor for us. Ground squirrels and raccoons knock out the power more than Putin has to date. So that's still our biggest one. Brian, do you see a lot of conversations around, state actors versus organized crime and those kind of things?
It's starting to tick up. I think the main concern is the attack that originates in an IT corporate environment and then cascades into the OT environment through those business collaborators. That's still the top concern, and that's still the predominant one we see. But more and more, we're starting to see these nation-state threat actors target industrial control systems, medical facilities, et cetera. I mean, I read a report just earlier this month how ransomware attacks against the healthcare industry has more than doubled in the last 5 years. And so, areas that historically maybe were left alone are now starting to be targeted. So I think we have to be concerned about it, but not get so paranoid and tunnel focused on that one aspect that we miss the internal attacks, the accidents, the cascading effects, because we're zoned in on the sensational attack that happens, periodically.
The basics, the foundational things are crucial to being more resilient, to building better security practices. And then you can move forward from there and think more advanced. So it really goes back to those kind of basics where you start.
Exactly.
So it was interesting when, not to get political,
Oh.
and we won't, that tanks rolled from Russia to the Ukraine. It took 36 days, I want to say, for some custom OT-based malware tools, Pipedream, Carbonite, whatever you want to call it, to really come to the fold and start being found in the environment, targeting Europe, specifically in the Ukraine, but also it's hard to define that boundary when you release malware. But it started to show up. It was 30-something days between origination of a, I guess not active war, but a military, whatever they're calling it. It took that long for that lag to go. So they had some things built. They had some other pieces and parts. Oh, crud, we got to quickly assemble this. Let's release it. And that's where we're starting to see that cyber to cyber physical. That's going to be a new landscape if there's more conflict on the horizon.
Absolutely.
That's a little funny, and I don't want to go there, but
I really like that segue, and I'm going to key in on it for a second because Brian, during your introduction, you shared an interesting point where you're also starting to focus on the physical components of how you move from the cyber world into the physical. So share some perspective just briefly with the group that's on the call. What are we seeing there? What things should we be aware of? Because obviously there's impact from leveraging online. You can do a bunch of research into somebody, then you can maybe hack into a different space. Maybe it's a plant, or maybe it's just you're targeting different individuals. Talk a little bit about how the physical security piece might tie in and play out that narrative a little bit.
Yeah, and that's where collaboration comes into play. Many companies have a cyber team and a physical security team reporting up two different chains. So combining them all into one organization, even if you don't do that, again, have that collaborative structure and start to share tools. So crisis management platforms, event management platforms, can you weave your incident response into those different platforms and start to leverage a commonality around how we're going to notify employees, how we're going to notify the public, and practicing those. And then looking at different technologies that can integrate together. So, do I need to, badge to get into a factory, or, can it be proximity related? And how does that tie into my corporate ID? So that if a person leaves, you're disabling all of their access, in one command versus having to go manually chase down a bunch of areas to remove access. And then back to that, evacuation aspect, now that we've been working from home, I don't even think about video surveillance as much as I used to, or what if I had to evacuate a facility? But those are still real concerns, and making sure that, again, you're documenting them, you're practicing them, and you're looking for ways to automate that beyond just your typical pen and paper.
Sean, anything else to add there, sir?
Yeah, I think the traditional method was the 3Gs, right? Guns, guards, and gates. Yeah. We have better technologies for that can be digital. IP cameras are getting a lot better. Gone are the days where your local, outlet store goes and buys a local camera and they're recording it on a VHS tape. We can see that stuff globally in a minute. You can be tracking a van as it runs around San Francisco and guys get out and grab all the purses and get back in the van. You can track that van around the city as it moves from Louis Vuitton to Louis Vuitton. It's a different thing. You can track and scan someone's badge as they're entering a power plant and check if that's the face that's holding the badge. There's a lot more we can do than the 3Gs. And I'm excited to see where this can go as we start to embed some of the facial recognition software. Tricky topic. As we start to blend in physical security, as we start to blend in sensors that record glass being broken, as we get temperature sensors that are better. When you start to see the heat go up in a data center, what else are you pulling into that threat intel feed? Yeah. And it's going to be somewhat physical. Is there a fire going on? Is there a water leak? Is there a guy running around with a flare gun? Like, those type of things are relevant.
Yeah, and then you add that and you say, okay, now that we have all this great access, how do we secure it best? Of course.
Yeah. Exactly. The other neat thing I'm seeing is around the concept of digital twins. It's expensive to try to go build, a lab environment with all this OT equipment. And so you're starting to see more development in, building like a digital representation, a model of different OT equipment. And that's great from an availability and maintenance standpoint. But you can also now weave in cyber elements into that. You could actually simulate a ransomware attack in one of these digital model environments and say, oh, so that's how it would behave. And that's indications that we should be looking for in our live OT environment. So I think as you look out to the future, there's going to be some really interesting innovations that are going to be helpful from a security standpoint.
Absolutely. Brian, I'll stick with you for our first round of parting shots. Any final thoughts? Anything else that you want to make sure that those who are still connected are hearing as they kind of take on the OT space? As our main topic of today's conversation was overcoming security challenges. Any final things that you'd like to mention here, sir?
Well, this is an exciting space. It is definitely going to be a key target for the future. But there's a lot of places to go for help. You don't have to go at this alone. There are a lot of great documentation out there from NIST. There are a number of exciting OT partners that are entering this space, either as traditional IT security companies that are moving into the OT space, and greenfield OT security vendors. So don't think you're on an island. Reach out for help and start today, because like I said, it's a long road to build a comprehensive security program in these environments.
Awesome, Brian. Thank you. Sean, same question to you, sir. Any final thoughts here?
Yeah, I'm going to turn back on you. Do you know what happened 12 years, 3 months, and 10 days ago?
Does this have something to do with that?
Nebraska beat Colorado. And
I was going to say this has something to do with Nebraska, doesn't it?
Folsom Field will be watered. We'll be slowing those Huskers down. Bring it. There was college football talk in the chat window.
I noticed. I was like, this has got to do with something having to do with the Huskers in the chat.
So the thing I'm most excited about is that IT and data are listening. IT and data know they can't run rampant. Brian talked about digital twin. Incredible technology, things we need to be bringing forth. When I was at General Electric, I got to put on a VR headset and not physically at all, entirely digitally crawl through a locomotive looking for a bolt. It was so cool. And we need that technology. We need to be monitoring our raw chicken's temperature in the whole value cycle and be able to track that one temperature spike in a salmonella outbreak to that one piece of chicken on that production line. We can't do it without security being at the front. And for the first time, people are listening to that. And we're building these things more resilient before we export this data. but that's coming. The winners and losers coming out of this glutton and dearth of oil and gas are going to be people that use their digital assets better. They use their human capital better. The way we can do that and unlock that skill set is only through security. We have to evolve these systems, and people are starting to do that. And we're getting more attention from historic groups that haven't cared. Pharma, logistics, logistics centers, transportation has a lot of regulations coming. Those are places that are starting to come to the fold. If we can solve the security thing, we can unlock a lot of other cool stuff. The OT environment, I'm making this statement, it's entirely unjustified, but I'm making it. The OT environment is the largest untapped data lake in the world. We should be using this data better, and we can't do it until we secure it.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. Sean, Brian, thank you for being here. Thank you for the incredible, insightful conversation on OT, on the challenges as we ventured across the collaboration to patching, from talking about how we can better work together to everything in between. Thank you both for being here today. And thank you everyone for joining our Optiv LinkedIn Live today. If you're interested in learning more about OT, make sure you visit optiv.com to view all OT resources. Also, be sure to tune into Sean's panel participation with fellow industry experts coming up on March 14th. I think it's 9 a.m. Mountain Time with Oil and Gas Journal's webinar for prioritizing cybersecurity and OT. And lastly, happy International Women's Day to all of the women out there to continue the conversation about embracing equity and celebrating Women's History Month. Mark your calendars. There will be another LinkedIn Live coming up on March 13th at 10 a.m. Mountain with Optiv's Julie Talbot Hubbard, who was also selected today officially as a Power 100 Women in Cybersecurity. So join her. She's going to be hosting a panel of incredibly inspiring women across technology and security. Thank you for being here. Really happy you all were able to join us, and have a wonderful rest of your week. Happy International Women's Day.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.